Hello there, and welcome to the Science for Sleep channel. Tonight, we'll explore ancient Egypt, a civilization that flourished for over 3,000 years along the gentle banks of the Nile River, creating wonders that have mystified us ever since. We'll drift through pyramids that held pharaohs for eternity, discover gods and goddesses whose stories echo through time, and uncover secrets hidden beneath golden sands for millennia. These quiet wonders have witnessed countless generations pass, holding mysteries we're only beginning to understand. You've got nothing to do but rest. Let your mind relax, your breathing slow, and your body grow light. Just before we begin, if this helps you rest, consider liking and subscribing. One sleepy soul at a time. Now, let's begin our journey into ancient Egypt. Imagine standing at the edge of an endless desert where ancient women would use the feces of crocodiles as contraceptive, a substance so remarkably alkaline that it worked much like modern spermicides, showing how the ancient Egyptians transformed nature itself into tools of survival and intimate control over their own destinies. This practice reveals the sophistication of their biological knowledge and their desperate need to regulate family size in a world where resources were precious and survival uncertain. The crocodile feces contained chemical properties that created an inhospitable environment for sperm, making them an effective barrier method thousands of years before modern science understood how reproduction worked. The pharaohs who ruled this vast kingdom believed something extraordinary, that the earth was both flat and round simultaneously, a paradox that unified the concepts of geometry and cosmic order into one harmonious vision that shaped their entire understanding of the universe. They envisioned the world as a flat disk surrounded by waters, yet they also understood circular patterns in the heavens and the movement of celestial bodies. This duality in their cosmological thinking allowed them to reconcile different observations of nature into a single, coherent worldview that influenced their architecture, religion, and mathematical calculations for centuries. When a cat died in ancient Egypt, the entire household would shave their eyebrows in mourning, a gesture so powerful and sacred that killing a feline brought the penalty of death itself, transforming these creatures into beings of pure divinity. The loss of a beloved cat was treated with the same gravity as losing a family member, and the grief was expressed through this extreme physical act of hair removal. Egyptians believed that cats possessed divine protection and spiritual significance, serving as intermediaries between the mortal and spiritual worlds in ways that modern minds struggle to fully comprehend. Some pharaohs would cover their servants' bodies with honey during long ceremonies, allowing insects to stick to their skin rather than bothering the king, a practice that reveals the lengths to which rulers would go to preserve their comfort and divine status. These ceremonies could last for hours, and maintaining absolute silence and stillness was crucial for maintaining the sacred atmosphere. The honey served as a natural adhesive trap, drawing flies and other insects toward the servants instead, allowing the pharaoh to experience uninterrupted communion with the gods without the annoyance of buzzing insects disrupting the sacred moment. Cleopatra, the most famous queen of Egypt, was not born in Egypt at all, but in Greece, and she married her own brother to secure her throne, a union that seems shocking to modern ears, but was considered divine law necessary for royal survival. She was part of the Ptolemaic dynasty, which originated in Macedonia and brought Greek culture to Egypt. Her marriage to her brother Ptolemy VI was a political strategy to maintain power and legitimacy, following the ancient Egyptian practice of royal incest that had been abandoned centuries earlier but was revived during this period. The young pharaoh, Tutankhamun, was the product of an incestuous relationship between his father, Akhenaten, and his sister, a pattern among noble families desperate to keep the royal bloodline pure and untainted by common ancestry, ensuring their divine connection remained unbroken. This genetic inbreeding had devastating effects on his health, causing multiple physical deformities and contributing to his death at approximately 19 years old. Yet despite his brief life and troubled health, his tomb would become one of history's greatest archaeological treasures, preserved perfectly beneath the desert sands for millennia. During ceremonies of immense religious importance, pharaohs would wear artificial beards made entirely of metal, mimicking the appearance of Anubis himself, transforming their mortal bodies into living manifestations of the god of death. These false beards were carefully crafted from gold or bronze and attached to the chin with straps, creating an imposing and divine appearance that enhanced the pharaoh's supernatural authority. The transformation was completed through elaborate costumes and regalia that further blurred the line between mortal ruler and divine being, creating an awe-inspiring presence that commanded absolute reverence from all who witnessed the ceremony. Crocodiles and hippopotamuses posed constant threats to those living near the Nile's banks, creatures so feared that their sudden appearance could mean drowning, dismemberment, or a slow and terrifying death beneath the murky predatory waters. These massive animals could capsize boats and drag people underwater without warning, and their unpredictable nature made them symbols of chaos and danger in Egyptian mythology. The Nile, while providing life-giving waters and fertile soil, was also a deadly frontier where villagers and workers faced daily peril from these ancient predators that ruled the river with unchallenged authority. The Great Pyramid stands in perfect alignment with Orion's belt, a correspondence so precise that it defies simple coincidence, suggesting astronomical knowledge that challenges our understanding of ancient mathematics and celestial observation capabilities. The three main pyramids of Giza mirror the three stars of Orion's belt with remarkable accuracy, and the sides of the Great Pyramid align with the cardinal directions within a fraction of a degree. This alignment suggests that the ancient Egyptians possessed sophisticated astronomical instruments and knowledge, or that they spent generations perfecting their understanding of the stars and their movements across the night sky. Over 130 pyramids have been discovered across the Egyptian desert, yet satellite imagery using specialized radiation technology has revealed even more pyramids buried beneath the sand, waiting silently for thousands of years to be discovered by future generations. These hidden structures lie dormant beneath dunes and sediment, their existence known only to modern technology that can penetrate the Earth's surface. Archaeologists estimate that as many as additional pyramids may still be undiscovered, suggesting that our understanding of Egypt's monumental ambitions is far from complete, and that future discoveries will continue to reshape our knowledge of this ancient civilization. Ramses the Great fathered 96 sons and 60 daughters during his extraordinary reign that lasted more than 66 years, creating one of history's most expansive family dynasties that would shape Egypt for generations to come. His numerous children were carefully selected and trained for positions of authority throughout the kingdom, ensuring that his bloodline remained at every level of power and influence. Some of his children became generals, priests, administrators, and governors, spreading his legacy across the vast territories he controlled and maintaining his influence even after his death. a dynasty so extensive that genealogists still struggle to trace all family connections today. The ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic writing system contained roughly 6,000 symbols, yet only about 1,000 were used regularly by scribes and priests who devoted their entire lives to mastering this complex language. Each symbol could represent a sound, a word, or a concept, creating a system of profound flexibility that allowed writers to express both concrete and abstract ideas with remarkable precision and poetry. Learning to write hieroglyphics required years of intense study and training, and skilled scribes were highly valued members of society who served as administrators, record keepers, and keepers of sacred knowledge that ordinary people could never access or understand. Mummification was not merely about preserving bodies, but represented a profound philosophical belief that the physical form was absolutely essential for continued existence in the eternal afterlife and spiritual realm beyond death. The ancient Egyptians believed that the human soul required a permanent home to return to, and without the physical body preserved and maintained, the soul would wander lost and tormented for all eternity. This practice shaped their entire civilization's priorities, economics, and religious practices, consuming vast resources and labor to create tomb complexes and perfecting techniques to defy the natural decay that claimed all mortal flesh in the harsh desert environment. The Nile River's predictable annual flooding gave ancient Egypt a unique advantage that no other civilization possessed, allowing farmers to plan harvests with mathematical precision and support enormous populations through surplus agricultural production. When the Nile flooded, it deposited rich black silt across the floodplain, creating incredibly fertile soil that sustained millions of people for 3,000 years without depleting the land's essential nutrients. This reliable cycle of inundation became so central to Egyptian culture and religion that they developed an entire theological system around the flooding, treating it as a divine blessing that proved the gods favored their civilization above all others. Pharaohs were considered living gods and divine mediators between the human realm and the spiritual realm, embodying both supreme political authority and sacred cosmic responsibility that transcended mortal understanding. The people believed that without the pharaoh's constant communication with the gods, through rituals and ceremonies, the entire universe would fall into chaos, and the Nile would cease to flood, crops would fail, and civilization would collapse into darkness. This belief gave pharaohs absolute power, because challenging their authority meant risking the cosmic order itself, making rebellion not merely political treason, but cosmic blasphemy against the very laws that held reality together. The Great Pyramid originally stood at 146.6 meters tall and was built from approximately 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing around 2.5 tons on average, totaling more than 6.3 million tons of stone assembled with astonishing precision. The construction techniques used to move and place these massive blocks remain partially mysterious, as no ancient texts describe the methods used, though archaeologists have developed theories involving ramps, levers, and thousands of workers laboring in coordinated teams. The precision of the pyramid's construction is so remarkable that the sides align with the cardinal directions to within a fraction of a degree, demonstrating mathematical and astronomical knowledge that challenges our understanding of ancient capabilities. Ancient Egyptians worshipped over 2,000 gods and goddesses, each representing different aspects of nature, human experience, and the cosmic forces that governed existence and determined the fate of mortals and immortals alike. These deities existed in complex relationships with one another, sometimes merging into combined forms, sometimes competing for dominance, creating a religious system of remarkable philosophical depth and practical social utility. Different cities maintained their own patron deities, and this religious diversity somehow coexisted with a unified state, showing how the Egyptian civilization balanced centralized political power with local spiritual autonomy and cultural pride in regional identity. Egyptian women enjoyed far greater rights than their counterparts in most other ancient civilizations, possessing the legal ability to own property, conduct business independently, and initiate divorce proceedings without male permission or approval. Women could inherit estates, manage household businesses, and, in rare cases, serve in administrative or religious positions, giving them economic power and social influence that was remarkable for the ancient world. This relative equality extended even to common women who could support their families through trade, craftsmanship, or agriculture. And widows could control their late husband's property and make decisions affecting their children's futures, a level of autonomy that wouldn't be matched in Europe for many more centuries. Pharaohs were allowed to marry multiple wives, and it was considered socially acceptable and even expected for royal relatives to marry within the family, including uncles marrying nieces and brothers marrying sisters, all to maintain bloodlines considered divine and preserve the purity of their genetic inheritance. These marriages were political and religious arrangements designed to strengthen dynastic bonds and keep power concentrated within the royal family, preventing outsiders from claiming authority or diluting the sacred essence believed to reside within the pharaonic line. The nobles and common people generally did not practice such extensive intermarriage, though royal incest became increasingly common in later Egyptian history, particularly during the Ptolemaic period when foreign rule normalized such practices. The ancient Egyptians developed sophisticated medical knowledge, with physicians setting broken bones with splints made from bark and linen, treating wounds with honey that served as an antibiotic, and using herbal remedies derived from plants to cure various ailments that plagued the population. Evidence from papyri suggests that Egyptian doctors performed complex surgical procedures, though mortality rates remained high compared to modern medicine, and many conditions considered routine today proved fatal without antibiotics or modern surgical techniques. Some of their remedies proved scientifically valid, with modern testing confirming that many Egyptian herbal treatments did indeed have genuine medicinal properties that helped patients recover from infections and injuries that would otherwise have proven fatal. Cats were revered as sacred protectors in ancient Egypt, with the goddess Bastet depicted with a cat's head and worshipped throughout the civilization as a symbol of protection, fertility, and divine grace that watched over households and families. The reverence for cats extended to such extremes that killing a cat, even accidentally, could result in death penalties, and families mourned deceased cats by shaving their eyebrows, a sign of deep grief and loss that demonstrated the sacred bond between humans and these divine animals. This spiritual connection to cats shaped Egyptian daily life, creating a unique civilization where a common animal achieved divine status and possessed legal protection that no other civilization offered to non-human creatures with such consistency and religious fervor. Parte 3, Photos 21-30, the mummification process, developed into an elaborate and sacred ritual that took approximately 70 days from start to finish, involving the careful removal of internal organs through small incisions and their preservation in special containers called canopic jars. The body would then be treated with natron salt, a naturally occurring mineral that desiccated the corpse and prevented decay, drawing moisture from the tissues and creating an inhospitable environment for decomposition. After this treatment, the body would be wrapped in layers of linen soaked in oils and aromatic resins, with amulets and protective charms placed between the layers to guard the deceased's spiritual essence during their journey through the dangerous underworld toward eternal paradise. Hieroglyphic writing could flow in multiple directions depending on the artistic and practical needs of the scribe or carver, moving from left to right, right to left, or even vertically down the page, with the direction typically indicated by which way the pictorial characters faced. This flexibility in writing direction allowed Egyptian artists to create balanced and aesthetically pleasing compositions on temple walls and papyrus scrolls, adapting the script to fit the available space rather than being confined to a single rigid format. The direction of reading was ultimately determined by the orientation of the human and animal figures depicted within the hieroglyphic text, with characters always facing toward the beginning of a line or passage to guide the reader's eye naturally through the composition. The Nile River provided not merely water and fertile soil, but served as the literal and spiritual backbone of Egyptian civilization, making travel, trade, and communication possible across the vast kingdom's extensive territories. The river's annual flooding cycle was so predictable and essential that the Egyptians organized their entire calendar and religious system around its rhythmic movements, dividing the year into 3 seasons corresponding to inundation, growth, and harvest. When the Nile failed to flood at expected levels due to drought or other climatic factors, famine would sweep across the land, leading to widespread suffering, social upheaval, and frequently the collapse of dynastic power structures that could not adapt to the crisis. The ancient Egyptians developed sophisticated papyrus production techniques, creating writing surfaces by pressing together the inner stems of papyrus plants into thin sheets that were then dried and burnished to a smooth finish. This remarkable innovation provided a lightweight, portable writing material that was far superior to clay tablets or stone inscriptions for recording administrative documents, religious texts, and literary works of all kinds. The dry climate of Egypt allowed papyrus scrolls to survive for thousands of years with remarkable preservation, providing historians with an unparalleled window into daily life, administrative procedures, religious beliefs, and the intellectual achievements of ancient Egyptian civilization. Memphis was established as the capital of unified Egypt and grew into a magnificent metropolitan center that dominated Egyptian political, religious, and economic life for centuries, serving as the seat of royal power and the administrative heart of the kingdom. The city's strategic location, near the junction of Upper and Lower Egypt, made it an ideal capital, and it became home to vast temple complexes dedicated to Ptah, a major deity, as well as numerous administrative buildings and residential quarters for the elite. Memphis declined in importance during later periods as other cities such as Thebes rose to prominence, but its monumental buildings and religious significance ensured that it remained a major religious and cultural center throughout Egyptian history. The social hierarchy of ancient Egypt was strictly defined and enforced, with the pharaoh at the apex as a divine being, followed by priests and nobility, then skilled artisans, merchants, and farmers, with slaves and enslaved captives forming the lowest tier of society. This rigid class system determined one's occupation, legal rights, marriage possibilities, and access to education and resources, making social mobility nearly impossible and creating a stable but highly stratified civilization. The hierarchy was justified through religious ideology that portrayed the pharaoh as the intermediary between gods and humans, and the complex bureaucracy that supported this system created unprecedented levels of administrative sophistication and coordination across a vast territory. Bread and beer were the staple foods that sustained the common people of ancient Egypt, with bread made from emmer wheat and consumed in enormous quantities as the dietary foundation for workers and peasants. Beer was brewed from barley and possessed lower alcoholic content than modern beer, serving as a safe alternative to water that could become contaminated, and it was consumed by all social classes from workers to nobility. The combination of bread and beer provided sufficient calories and nutrition to sustain the massive labor forces required for agricultural work and monumental construction projects, making these two staple commodities absolutely central to Egypt's ability to support its large population and undertake ambitious building campaigns. Senet was a beloved board game in ancient Egypt that resembled modern checkers in some respects, played with pieces that moved across a 30-square board according to dice throws, with certain squares providing advantages or penalties to the player's progress. Paintings and reliefs in tombs depict pharaohs and nobles playing Senet against divine opponents, suggesting that the game held spiritual significance beyond mere entertainment and may have represented the soul's journey through the afterlife. The game's popularity was so enduring that sets of Senet boards have been discovered in H. numerous royal tombs, including the famous treasure of Tutankhamun, indicating that nobles expected to continue enjoying their favorite games even in the eternal realms beyond death. The ancient Egyptians made remarkable advances in mathematics and geometry, developing systems for calculating areas and volumes, performing complex arithmetic operations, and understanding principles that allowed them to design and construct the pyramids with astonishing precision. Their mathematical knowledge extended to astronomy, where they tracked the movements of celestial bodies, predicted the flooding of the Nile, and created calendars that allowed them to organize their religious and agricultural activities. The precision of their mathematical calculations is evident in the exact alignment of pyramids with cardinal directions, the proportional relationships between architectural elements, and the accurate astronomical data encoded in temple orientations and inscriptions throughout the kingdom. The economy of ancient Egypt was based primarily on agriculture and the taxation of agricultural surplus, though extensive trade networks with Nubia to the south, Canaan and Syria to the east, and Mediterranean peoples to the north provided access to luxury goods and strategic resources. Merchants and traders traveled along established routes carrying Egyptian grain, linen, and manufactured goods in exchange for timber from Lebanon, spices from Arabia, and precious metals and stones from distant lands. This trade generated wealth for the kingdom and created economic dependencies with neighboring peoples who relied on Egyptian grain for survival, making Egypt a dominant economic power throughout the ancient Near East. Both men and women in ancient Egypt wore distinctive black kohl eye makeup applied around the eyes, with a practiced hand using special applicators and finely ground minerals mixed with oils. Beyond its cosmetic purposes, kohl provided practical sun protection for the sensitive eye area in the harsh desert climate and was believed to possess spiritual properties connected to the moon, god Thoth, and the protection of the divine eye. The application of coal was so universal and standardized that it became a cultural marker of Egyptian identity, with even young children and servants wearing some form of eye makeup, making it as fundamental to Egyptian appearance as clothing itself. Parte 4, Photos 31-40. The Nile's flooding was so vital to Egyptian survival that its failure to inundate the land at expected levels was considered a catastrophic event capable of toppling dynasties and plunging the entire nation into famine and despair. When the Nile failed to flood during periods of drought or climate change, crop production collapsed entirely, leading to widespread starvation that could persist for years and result in social upheaval and political instability. The fear of the Nile's failure was so profound that it became embedded in Egyptian religious and cultural consciousness, with priests performing elaborate rituals and prayers to ensure the river would continue its sacred annual journey and deliver its life-giving waters to the parched lands of the kingdom. Memphis rose to prominence as the unified capital of Egypt and evolved into a magnificent metropolitan center that dominated Egyptian civilization for centuries, serving as both the administrative heart of the kingdom and a major religious site dedicated to the god Ptah. The city's location near the boundary between Upper and Lower Egypt made it strategically ideal for governing both regions, and it accumulated wealth, temples, and monumental buildings that reflected Egypt's power and sophistication. Although Memphis eventually declined in importance as other cities like Thebes rose to prominence during later periods, its historical significance as the cradle of unified Egyptian civilization ensured its prominence in religious and cultural memory throughout the kingdom's long history. The ideology of kingship that developed during the early dynastic period fundamentally transformed Egyptian society by establishing the pharaoh as a divine being who served as the essential intermediary between the mortal and celestial realms. This concept elevated the monarch far above ordinary humans, granting pharaohs absolute authority and making them objects of worship and reverence comparable to the gods themselves. The religious foundation of pharaonic authority created an unquestionable legitimacy for royal rule and enabled the concentration of extraordinary power in the hands of individual rulers who could command the resources and labor of the entire nation in pursuit of their ambitious projects and divine purposes. During the Old Kingdom, commonly known as the Pyramid Age, Egypt experienced a period of unprecedented architectural ambition as successive pharaohs competed with each other to build increasingly impressive and massive pyramids. These enormous structures were not merely tombs, but monuments to divine immortality, constructed at staggering expense and requiring the coordination of thousands of workers over many years of intensive labor. The pyramids represented the absolute power of the pharaohs and their ability to command Egypt's resources and population to accomplish their vision, creating some of the most enduring monuments in human history that continue to inspire awe and wonder, even in the modern world. The ancient Egyptians developed sophisticated irrigation systems that captured and channeled the waters of the Nile into elaborate networks of canals, dikes, and reservoirs that allowed them to maximize agricultural productivity across their territory. These engineering systems represented a remarkable achievement of planning and coordination, allowing Egyptians to expand the amount of cultivable land and increase crop yields far beyond what would have been possible with natural flooding alone. The management of irrigation. Networks required complex bureaucratic oversight and technical expertise, with administrators monitoring water levels and making decisions about distribution that affected the survival of hundreds of thousands of people dependent on the carefully controlled agricultural surplus. Prisoners of war captured during Egypt's military campaigns faced a grim and often brutal fate, with many having their dominant hand severed to permanently prevent them from fighting again in future conflicts against Egyptian forces. This mutilation served both as a practical military measure to neutralize potential threats and as a visible punishment and humiliation meant to discourage resistance and rebellion. Archaeological evidence and artistic depictions in temple reliefs confirm the widespread use of this brutal practice, revealing the harsh realities of ancient Egyptian warfare and the consequences faced by those who opposed pharaonic power or resisted Egyptian imperial expansion. Egyptian soldiers were equipped with armor fashioned from overlapping metal scales or bands of wrapped leather that provided reasonable protection against weapons while still allowing sufficient mobility for combat operations in desert environments. Warriors relied heavily on shields made from wood and leather to deflect arrows and sword strikes, positioning these defensive implements strategically during battle formations designed to maximize their collective protection. The Egyptian military gradually evolved its armor and tactical systems over centuries, adopting new technologies and techniques from neighboring cultures while maintaining distinctive approaches to warfare that reflected their unique strategic needs and environmental conditions. The ancient Egyptians developed sophisticated methods of measuring and tracking time, using devices such as shadow poles that marked the passage of hours throughout the day, and water clocks that measured the night hours with surprising accuracy. These timekeeping devices allowed priests to regulate daily religious activities and ceremonies with precision, and they helped administrators coordinate labor, harvests, and administrative tasks across the vast kingdom. The development of accurate timekeeping was essential for Egyptian civilization's organization and the management of complex systems of irrigation, bureaucracy, and monumental construction that required careful coordination across different regions and over extended periods. Jewelry in ancient Egypt served not merely decorative purposes, but held deep religious significance and demonstrated the wearer's status and connection to divine power, with pieces crafted from gold, silver, and precious stones, including lapis lazuli and turquoise. The intricate craftsmanship evident in Egyptian jewelry reveals advanced metallurgical knowledge and artistic sophistication, with artisans creating complex designs through techniques including casting, filigree work, and inlay. Many pieces of jewelry found in tombs contained protective amulets and sacred symbols inscribed with hieroglyphic texts believed to provide spiritual protection and guidance to both the living wearer and the deceased in the afterlife. Ancient Egyptian bread often contained microscopic particles of grit from the querns used to grind grain, resulting in severe dental wear visible in mummified remains and skeletal material from all social classes, indicating that even the wealthy suffered from this consequence of their staple diet. The constant grinding of teeth against sand and stone particles over many years led to significant dental damage and likely caused considerable pain and discomfort throughout the lives of most Egyptians, regardless of their social status. Studies of mummified remains and ancient skeletal material reveal patterns of dental wear that provide insights into diet, health conditions, and the daily hardships faced by people living in ancient Egypt. Parte 5, Phatos 4150. Hunting was a cherished pastime and important activity for the ancient Egyptian elite, who pursued dangerous prey, including lions, hippopotamuses, and desert game, with bow and spear across the vast landscape surrounding the Nile Valley. These hunting expeditions served multiple purposes beyond mere recreation, providing meat for the royal household, demonstrating the courage and martial prowess of noble hunters, and removing dangerous predators from populated areas. Tomb paintings and reliefs extensively depict hunting scenes showing pharaohs and nobles triumphantly slaying fierce beasts, with these images serving both as records of actual hunts and as spiritual expressions of the ruler's ability to overcome chaos and maintain cosmic order through their dominion over nature's wild forces. The Great Sphinx of Giza stands majestically with the massive body of a lion and the contemplative head of a pharaoh, representing the merger of animal power and divine human authority in a single monumental form that has captivated observers for thousands of years. This enigmatic sculpture, carved from a single limestone ridge during the reign of Khafre, combines the strength and courage associated with the lion with the wisdom and authority embodied by the human pharaoh. The Sphinx's purpose remains somewhat mysterious despite centuries of scholarly speculation, though it likely served as a guardian figure and embodiment of royal power, protecting the Giza Plateau and the sacred burial grounds from invisible spiritual threats as well as mortal dangers. Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, was depicted with the distinctive head of an ibis bird and represented the intellectual and creative forces that allowed civilization to flourish through the development of language, mathematics, and sacred knowledge. Ancient Egyptian scribes and scholars invoked Thoth's guidance and blessing when they began their work, appealing to his divine wisdom to guide their hands and minds as they inscribed sacred texts and administrative documents on papyrus scrolls. The god's association with the moon and his role as keeper of divine secrets made him a figure of profound respect and reverence among the educated elite who recognized that knowledge and literacy were the foundations upon which Egyptian civilization rested and flourished. Horus, the falcon-headed god and divine son of Osiris and Isis, represented the sky itself and was believed to watch over pharaohs during their earthly reign and protect them even after their transition to the afterlife and eternity in the heavens. Every living pharaoh was considered a manifestation of Horus during their mortal existence, embodying the god's authority and spiritual power while serving as the intermediary between divine and human realms. The falcon symbolism associated with Horus emphasized swiftness, keen vision, and soaring majesty, qualities that Egyptians aspired to see in their rulers as they guided the nation through the challenges of temporal existence toward ultimate spiritual fulfillment. The Temple of Karnak was one of the largest and most impressive religious complexes in the entire ancient world, dedicated primarily to Amun-Ra and representing the accumulated architectural ambitions of numerous pharaohs who expanded and embellished it over centuries of construction. The temple complex contained multiple sanctuaries, courtyards, pylons, and sacred lakes, covering an enormous area and employing hundreds of priests who performed daily rituals and ceremonies designed to maintain cosmic order and ensure the gods' continued favor. The temple's size and complexity reflected both the immense wealth commanded by the pharaohs and the central importance of religion in Egyptian civilization, with temple construction and maintenance absorbing vast resources that could have been directed toward other projects, but were deemed essential for maintaining divine protection. Luxor, known in ancient times as Thebes, served as a spiritual and political center during Egypt's powerful New Kingdom period, filled with magnificent temples, royal monuments, and administrative buildings that demonstrated the city's importance and grandeur. The city became home to the great temple of Amun and numerous other religious structures, making it one of Egypt's holiest and most sacred locations where pilgrims traveled from across the kingdom to worship and present offerings. Thebes accumulated extraordinary wealth and power during this period, becoming in many respects the true center of Egyptian civilization, even as the political capital remained nominally at Memphis or other northern locations, reflecting the shift of power southward as the new kingdom consolidated its dominion. The Valley of the Kings served as the exclusive royal burial ground during Egypt's powerful New Kingdom period, hidden in a remote valley to protect the tombs of pharaohs from grave robbers who had desecrated earlier pyramids and extracted their treasures. The were hidden location of these tombs, cut deep into the bedrock of the valley floor and sealed with false passages and hidden chambers, represented a dramatic shift in funerary philosophy away from the monumental and easily located pyramid tombs of earlier periods. The Valley of the Kings preserved an extraordinary collection of royal burials that provide historians and archaeologists with invaluable information about royal life, religious practices, and technological capabilities of one of history's greatest civilizations. Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid and one of Egypt's most powerful and enduring pharaohs, ruled during the Fourth Dynasty when pyramid construction reached its peak and Egypt's wealth and organizational capabilities achieved unprecedented levels of sophistication. Khufu commanded the resources and labor necessary to construct a monument that would endure for over 4,000 years, representing the absolute height of his power and a statement of his divine authority and connection to eternity. The legends and stories surrounding Khufu, preserved in later Egyptian texts and classical accounts, portrayed him as both a visionary builder and a demanding ruler willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to achieve his monumental ambitions. The Step Pyramid of Djoser, designed by the architect Imhotep during the Third Dynasty, was the first large-scale stone structure ever built by humans and revolutionized architecture and construction techniques forever by demonstrating the feasibility of monumental stone construction. Before the Step Pyramid, monuments were constructed from mud brick or smaller stones, but Imhotep's innovative design showed that enormous stone blocks could be precisely cut and stacked to create structures of unprecedented scale and durability. This breakthrough in construction technology and architectural imagination unleashed a wave of pyramid building and monumental construction that would define Egyptian civilization for the next 1,000 years and establish pyramid construction as the preeminent expression of pharaonic power and divine immortality. Imhotep, credited as the first known architect in human history, designed the revolutionary Step Pyramid of Djoser and gained such legendary renown for his architectural genius that he was eventually deified and worshipped as a god in his own right after his death. His reputation extended beyond Egypt into the Mediterranean world and the Near East, where his fame persisted, and he was revered as a wise man and divine being whose achievements transcended ordinary human accomplishment. The elevation of Imhotep from mortal architect to divine figure reflects the profound respect and reverence that Egyptians held for creative genius and intellectual achievement, honoring those whose innovations and insights advanced civilization and demonstrated superhuman capabilities. Part 6, Photos 5160. Papyrus scrolls preserved within sealed tombs and protected from the Schweiz. Harsh elements contained sacred texts, administrative records, love poems, and literary works that survived millennia to reveal the inner workings of Egyptian civilization and the thoughts of those who lived within it. These ancient documents, written in careful hieroglyphic script, provide an unparalleled window into the daily concerns, religious beliefs, and intellectual achievements of the Egyptians, allowing modern scholars to understand how they approached everything from mathematics to medicine to art. The fact that so many papyri survived intact speaks to the dry climate of the desert and the care taken by those who placed them within tombs, suggesting that Egyptians understood their documents would survive to inform and inspire future generations separated from them by the vast expanse of time. The Book of the Dead represented a collection of sacred spells, magical formulas, and mystical instructions meant to guide the deceased through the dangerous underworld and help them navigate the obstacles and challenges they would encounter on their eternal journey toward rebirth and paradise. These texts were written on papyri, or inscribed within tombs, providing spiritual maps and protective incantations that the deceased could reference during their perilous passage through the hidden realms beyond death. The existence of these texts reveals the Egyptian understanding of the afterlife as a place of real danger and difficulty, requiring knowledge and magical power to survive, not merely a peaceful continuation of earthly existence, but an active struggle requiring courage and spiritual fortitude. The ancient Egyptians believed in a complex and intricate afterlife that required proper burial rituals, magical knowledge preserved in sacred texts, and the preservation of the physical body through mummification to ensure the deceased could maintain their individual consciousness and identity. This belief system shaped every aspect of Egyptian religious practice, art, architecture, and economics, with enormous resources devoted to preparing for and ensuring a successful transition to the eternal realm. The centrality of afterlife beliefs in Egyptian culture meant that preparations for death began early in life, with wealthy individuals commissioning tomb construction decades before their death and accumulating the objects and texts necessary for their spiritual survival beyond the mortal world. The weighing of the heart ceremony represented the crucial moment of judgment in the Egyptian afterlife, when the deceased's heart would be weighed against the feather of truth to determine whether their deeds during life merited entry into paradise or eternal damnation. This ceremony, depicted in many Book of the Dead papyri and tomb paintings, symbolized the ultimate accountability for one's actions during earthly existence, with the gods themselves acting as judges of the soul. The concept of moral judgment in the afterlife reveals a sophisticated ethical framework within Egyptian religion, suggesting that the gods cared not merely about ritual compliance, but about the actual conduct and character of individuals, rewarding virtue and punishing wickedness with eternal consequences. Osiris, the god of the afterlife and agriculture, was typically depicted wrapped in mummy bandages, holding a scepter and crook, embodying the principles of resurrection, regeneration, and the renewal of life that characterized the annual cycle of the Nile and the seasons of agricultural production. His mythology recounted how he was murdered and dismembered by his jealous brother Set, but was restored to life through the magic and devotion of his wife Isis. establishing him as a symbol of hope for resurrection and eternal life. The connection between Osiris and the renewal cycles of nature made him one of the most important and widely worshipped deities in Egypt, with his story providing comfort and hope to people of all social classes as they contemplated their own mortality and the possibility of rebirth beyond death. Isis, the goddess of magic and motherhood, was one of the most widely worshipped and beloved deities in Egyptian religion, appearing in countless temples, household shrines, and protective amulets worn by both men and women across all social classes. Her powers of magic and healing made her accessible to ordinary people seeking protection and intervention in their daily lives, and her role as a devoted mother and wife made her a model of virtue and compassion in Egyptian spiritual tradition. Isis eventually became so popular that her worship spread throughout the Mediterranean world, becoming one of the most significant religious figures in the Greco-Roman world, and continuing to influence Western spirituality even into the modern era through various mystical and esoteric traditions. Ra, the sun god, journeyed across the sky in his solar bark during the daylight hours, and at night traveled through the underworld in his night boat, completing an eternal cycle of death and rebirth that symbolized the continuity of existence and divine power. This daily journey of Ra through sky and underworld was believed essential for maintaining cosmic order and ensuring the continuation of creation, making the sun god one of the most important figures in Egyptian theology. The Egyptians understood that without Ra's cyclical journey, the universe would collapse into chaos, darkness would reign eternal, and all creation would cease, making the sun god's faithful journey the literal source of all life and order in the cosmos. Amun-Ra represented the combination of Amun, the hidden creator god, and Ra, the visible sun god, forming a supreme deity who embodied both the transcendent creative power of the universe and the active, life-giving force of the sun. This merger of two great gods created a figure of unprecedented power and significance in Egyptian theology, representing the ultimate expression of divine authority and creative potential. The emergence of Amun-Ra as the preeminent deity during Egypt's New Kingdom reflected the political and religious consolidation of Egyptian power, with the king assuming increasingly close identification with this supreme god and claiming direct descent from his divine essence. The Aten, worshipped during the revolutionary reign of Akhenaten, represented the sun disk itself and was briefly elevated above all other gods in a unique experiment in monotheistic religion that fundamentally challenged traditional Egyptian theology. Akhenaten attempted to establish Aten as the sole source of all life and creative power, displacing the traditional pantheon of gods and establishing a new religious system centered on the visible, tangible sun disk. Though this religious revolution ultimately failed and was reversed after Akhenaten's death, it reveals the intellectual sophistication of Egyptian theology and the willingness of at least one ruler to challenge millennia of established religious tradition in pursuit of what he believed to be a higher truth. Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of plague and healing, embodied the duality and paradox characteristic of Egyptian religious thought, representing both the destructive and creative forces of divine power. She was simultaneously feared as a carrier of disease and pestilence and revered as a healer capable of curing afflictions through her magical knowledge and divine power. The worship of Sekhmet reveals the Egyptian understanding that divinity encompassed both creative and destructive forces, and that the same goddess who could bring death could also provide healing and restoration, requiring careful propitiation and respect from those seeking her favor. Anubis, the jackal-headed god who presided over mummification and guided souls through the underworld, was revered as the protector of the dead and the guardian of burial practices that ensured the preservation and spiritual safety of the deceased. As a figure closely associated with death and the underworld, Anubis held a special place in Egyptian religious life, with priests engaged in mummification considered his sacred servants performing divinely ordained work. Tomb paintings frequently depicted Anubis in his role as embalmer, overseeing the preparation of bodies and guiding souls through the spiritual dangers that awaited them in the dark realms beyond death, providing comfort and reassurance to the living. Party 7, Pharaohs 6170, temples in ancient Egypt served multiple essential functions simultaneously, acting as centers of religious worship and spiritual devotion, while also functioning as major administrative, economic, and educational institutions that shaped Egyptian civilization. These massive structures housed vast numbers of priests and temple workers, managed enormous tracts of agricultural land, controlled trade networks, and accumulated tremendous wealth and resources. The temples wielded influence comparable to that of the pharaohs themselves, making them centers of real political power and authority that rivaled the crown's dominion in certain regions and periods, with high priests becoming extremely powerful figures who could challenge pharaonic authority and influence the succession of rulers. Pharaohs commissioned massive temple complexes decorated with hieroglyphic texts and mythological scenes that preserved religious knowledge and demonstrated their divine authority and connection to the gods for all eternity. These elaborate decorations served both practical and spiritual purposes, recording religious rituals and sacred narratives while simultaneously functioning as propaganda that reinforced the pharaoh's legitimacy and portrayed their rule as ordained by the gods themselves. The investment of enormous resources in temple construction and decoration reflects the profound importance that the pharaohs placed on religion and their determination to ensure that their divine authority would be remembered and celebrated across generations separated from them by the vast expanse of time. Priests in ancient Egypt underwent rigorous training and maintained strict purity requirements throughout their lives, spending many years learning sacred rituals, astronomical calculations, and the complex theological knowledge necessary to serve the gods properly. Priests were required to bathe multiple times daily, refrain from sexual activity during certain periods, follow strict dietary restrictions, and maintain scrupulous personal hygiene to ensure they remained spiritually pure and acceptable in the presence of the divine. This demanding lifestyle reflected the Egyptian belief that close proximity to the gods required extraordinary levels of spiritual preparation and moral discipline, making the priesthood one of the most demanding and respected professions in Egyptian society. Religious festivals were celebrated throughout the Egyptian calendar with great pomp and ceremony, honoring specific gods and goddesses with elaborate processions, animal sacrifices, and communal gatherings of worshippers from across the kingdom. These festivals provided breaks from labor and opportunity for social connection, allowing people of all social classes to participate in communal religious expression and receive blessings from the gods. The festivals also served important administrative functions, allowing authorities to assess the population, collect taxes, and demonstrate the pharaohs' piety and connection to divine forces, making religious celebrations central to both spiritual life and political control. Amulets were worn by ancient Egyptians of all social classes as protective charms featuring images of gods, sacred symbols, and hieroglyphic inscriptions that were believed to channel divine protection and spiritual power. These objects were crafted from materials ranging from humble clay to precious metals and stones, allowing people of limited means to access spiritual protection while enabling the wealthy to commission extraordinarily beautiful and elaborate pieces. The ubiquity of amulets in Egyptian society reveals a widespread belief in the power of sacred objects to influence fate and provide protection against invisible dangers, reflecting a worldview where spiritual forces actively interfered in daily life and required constant propitiation and appeasement. The Ankh symbol, representing eternal life itself, was carried by gods and pharaohs, appearing on tombs, amulets, and sacred objects throughout Egyptian civilization as a visual reminder of the eternal nature of the soul. This cross-shaped symbol, with a loop at the top, became one of the most recognizable images from ancient Egypt, appearing in countless artistic compositions and serving as a protective talisman. The symbol's persistence across thousands of years of Egyptian history suggests its profound spiritual significance and its ability to communicate essential truths about the nature of existence to people across different periods and social classes who saw it inscribed on monuments and worn as personal protection. The scarab beetle was venerated as a powerful symbol of rebirth and regeneration, with scarab amulets and seals crafted from stone, faience, and precious materials serving as protective charms and spiritual tools. The beetle's natural habit of rolling dung balls inspired the Egyptians to see in it a representation of the sun's daily journey across the sky and its symbolic death and rebirth each day. Scarab symbolism became so central to Egyptian religious and daily life that these images appear everywhere, from funeral texts to personal jewelry, with people believing that possessing a scarab would grant them the beetle's power of transformation and renewal in their own spiritual journey. Egyptian cosmology divided the world into sky, earth, and underworld, each governed by different deities and populated by distinct spiritual forces and entities that were accessible through sacred knowledge, proper ritual performance, and spiritual development. The sky belonged to Neat, the goddess depicted as a woman arching over the earth, while Gabe represented the earth itself, and Duat represented the dangerous underworld inhabited by the dead and supernatural beings. This three-part cosmological framework helped Egyptians understand their place in the universe and guided religious practice with the goal of maintaining balance and harmony between these different realms and ensuring the successful journey of souls between them. Heka, understood as Egyptian magic, was considered a natural force that existed throughout the universe and could be manipulated by those with proper knowledge and spiritual power, used by gods and pharaohs to maintain cosmic order and ensure the continuity of existence. Far from being considered supernatural or opposed to nature, Heka was viewed as fundamental to how the universe functioned, with gods themselves relying on magical knowledge to create and maintain creation. The study and practice of Heka became central to priesthood and royal training, with access to magical knowledge representing a source of power comparable to military force or economic resources in terms of its ability to influence events and maintain control. Scribes held extremely honored positions in Egyptian society, undergoing years of training to master the thousands of hieroglyphic symbols and various writing systems, serving as vital administrators, record keepers, educators, and custodians of written knowledge. Scribes were exempt from the physical labor required of most Egyptians and enjoyed considerable social prestige, with their ability to read and write making them indispensable to the functioning of Egypt's complex bureaucracy and religious institutions. The power held by scribes derived from their monopoly on written communication and their role in recording everything from tax assessments to religious rituals, making them gatekeepers of knowledge and essential figures in maintaining the machinery of state. Parte 8, Phatos 7180. The Rosetta Stone, inscribed with the same text recorded in 3 different writing systems, hieroglyphic, demotic, and Greek, became the crucial key that allowed scholars to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics in the 19th century and unlock the knowledge preserved within thousands of ancient texts. For centuries after the fall of ancient Egypt, the meaning of hieroglyphics remained a mystery to scholars, who could see the beautiful symbols but could not comprehend their meaning or the language they represented. The discovery and subsequent study of the Rosetta Stone by scholars like Jean-François Champollion finally allowed the translation of hieroglyphic texts, opening an entire lost world of knowledge and revealing the thoughts, beliefs, and accomplishments of one of history's greatest civilizations that had been silent for over 2,000 years. Egyptian art followed strict conventions and rigid rules that persisted across centuries and different dynasties, with one of the most distinctive being hierarchical scale, where important figures including pharaohs were depicted as physically larger than ordinary people, servants, or enemies depicted in the same artistic composition. This artistic convention served important symbolic purposes, visually communicating social hierarchy and the relative importance of different figures in the composition, through their relative physical sizes rather than through realistic proportions. Artists followed these conventions with remarkable consistency, suggesting a cultural agreement about the purposes of art and the proper way to visually represent important truths about the world, making Egyptian art more closely related to written communication than to realistic representation. Tombs were decorated extensively with paintings and reliefs depicting scenes of daily life, religious rituals, hunting expeditions, and offerings of food and goods, with the belief that the pharaoh would need access to these things in the afterlife and could use the painted images as spiritual substitutes. The tomb paintings and reliefs provide modern historians with invaluable information about how ancient Egyptians dressed, worked, ate, and spent their leisure time, as well as their religious beliefs and social organization. This deliberate act of decoration reflected the Egyptian desire to ensure that their deceased rulers maintained familiar surroundings and access to necessary resources in the eternal realm, transforming tombs into complete replicas of the earthly world that could sustain the deceased through eternity. Clothing in ancient Egypt was made primarily from linen, a fabric produced from flax plants that were cultivated extensively along the Nile and processed into thread through spinning and weaving techniques that produced a lightweight and breathable cloth ideal for the desert climate. While linen was the most common fabric, it was difficult to dye with color, so most Egyptian clothing was off-white or natural beige color, with color and elaboration reserved for the wealthy who could afford luxury additions. The simplicity of Egyptian clothing reflected both the practical needs of the hot climate and deeper cultural values, emphasizing modesty and standardization, with even royalty constrained by similar basic clothing styles that were distinguished primarily through the addition of ornate jewelry and elaborate headdresses that communicated rank and status. Children in ancient Egypt played with toys made from wood, clay, and stone, including dolls with movable joints, balls, animal figurines, and gaming pieces resembling those played by adults, revealing that children's play and adult recreation shared many similarities. These toys were sometimes placed in tombs alongside their young owners, suggesting that Egyptians believed children would continue to need entertainment and companionship in the afterlife, just as they had in their mortal existence. The survival of these ancient toys provides evidence of childhood as a recognized life stage with its own activities and pleasures, showing that even in a demanding and often harsh ancient world, Egyptians valued play and recreation for developing minds and bodies. The ancient Egyptians developed forms of early cosmetic surgery and dental work that reveals sophisticated medical knowledge, with evidence of bone grafting, dental implants, and surgical procedures discovered in mummified remains from various periods and locations throughout Egypt. Some mummified individuals show evidence of trepanation, the surgical removal of portions of the skull, performed successfully, with the patient surviving for years afterward, demonstrating remarkable surgical skill and anatomical knowledge. Archaeological and paleopathological studies of human remains have revealed that ancient Egyptian physicians attempted complex medical procedures including cataract surgery, spinal fusion, and tumor removal, showing a willingness to attempt interventions and a level of technical skill that would not be matched again for many centuries in other parts of the ancient world. Egyptian women could own businesses and manage commercial enterprises independently, inheriting property from parents or husbands and conducting legal proceedings in their own names without requiring male permission or oversight. Women could work as merchants, brewers, bakers, weavers, and perfumers, building substantial businesses and accumulating significant wealth that granted them considerable social power and independence. The economic rights granted to Egyptian women represented a degree of personal autonomy and economic agency that was extraordinary in the ancient world, making Egyptian women among the most liberated in any ancient civilization, with legal protections and economic opportunities that women in other contemporary societies did not possess. Marriage in ancient Egypt was understood as a practical arrangement, often negotiated between families seeking to form advantageous alliances and combine households, yet affection and companionship between spouses were valued and celebrated in Egyptian poetry and personal correspondence. Love poetry from ancient Egypt expresses genuine emotional attachment and romantic passion between spouses, suggesting that while marriages might begin as economic or political arrangements, they frequently developed into relationships characterized by sincere affection. Divorce was permitted in Egypt and could be initiated by either party, particularly the wife, who could reclaim her property and return to her family, a provision that provided considerable protection for women and reflected a pragmatic approach to marriage and partnership. Musicians played important roles in temples and royal courts, using instruments including harps, lyres, sistrums with jingling metal discs, and reed pipes to accompany religious ceremonies, royal celebrations, and entertainment events throughout Egyptian society. Music was considered essential to religious rituals and believed to please the gods and enhance the efficacy of ceremonies and prayers, with professional musicians commanding respect and compensation for their services. The development of musical instruments and notation suggests a sophisticated musical tradition that evolved over centuries, with different periods and dynasties contributing innovations that enriched Egypt's musical heritage and cultural expression. Egyptian dance was an integral and honored part of religious rituals, entertainment, and daily life celebrations, with depictions of acrobatic dancers and performers appearing throughout tomb decorations and preserved on papyrus scrolls recording various activities. Dancers were trained from childhood to master complex movements and rhythmic patterns, performing at religious festivals, royal events, and private celebrations where their performances were believed to entertain both living audiences and the gods themselves. The prominent depiction of dance in Egyptian art and the specialized training required suggests that dancing held significant cultural status and that skilled dancers achieved considerable prestige and social recognition within Egyptian society. The ancient Egyptians domesticated various animal species, including cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs, which provided essential sources of meat, labor, transportation, and materials for clothing through the harvesting of hides and wool. These domesticated animals allowed Egyptians to supplement their grain-based diet with animal protein and to perform necessary agricultural and construction labor that would have been impossible for humans alone to accomplish. The careful management of livestock herds required organizational sophistication and long-term planning, with evidence of veterinary care and selective breeding suggesting that Egyptians possessed considerable knowledge about animal husbandry and the management of animal populations. Parte 9, Phatos 8190, dogs were kept as hunting companions and beloved household pets throughout ancient Egypt, with some appearing to be cherished family members who were carefully buried in prepared tombs alongside their owners for companionship in the eternal realm. Archaeological evidence shows that dogs received medical care, were given names, and were mourned when they died, suggesting genuine emotional bonds between humans and their canine companions. The importance of dogs in Egyptian culture is reflected in the prevalence of dog representations in art and tomb paintings, with dogs depicted participating in hunts, sleeping near their owner's feet, and receiving food and care that demonstrates the affection and status granted to these animals within Egyptian society. Fishing was a common and essential activity along the Nile River and its adjacent waters, with fishing nets, hooks, and specialized boats depicted in tomb scenes and actual fishing equipment recovered from archaeological sites throughout Egypt. Fishermen used a variety of techniques including net casting, hook and line fishing, and trapping in woven baskets, methods that allowed them to capture the abundant fish populations that provided crucial protein to the Egyptian diet. The prevalence of fishing scenes in tomb art and the quantity of fishing equipment recovered archaeologically suggests that fishing was not merely a subsistence activity, but an important element of Egyptian economy and a source of food security that supplemented agricultural production and allowed the population to thrive despite the unpredictability of seasonal flooding. Agricultural practices in ancient Egypt included systematic crop rotation and careful management of irrigation canals and water systems designed to maximize yields and ensure reliable food production year after year, regardless of seasonal variations. Egyptian farmers developed extensive knowledge of soil management, planting schedules, and water distribution, creating a sophisticated system of agriculture that could support dense populations and generate the surplus that enabled civilization to flourish. The integration of agricultural science with administrative systems allowed Egypt to track harvests, manage storage, and plan for lean years, demonstrating a level of agricultural sophistication and economic planning that was exceptional in the ancient world and a major factor in Egypt's long-term stability and success. Egyptian pottery evolved gradually over thousands of years, developing distinctive shapes, decorative styles, and manufacturing techniques that changed in recognizable patterns and allowed archaeologists to date tombs and determine the age of settlements with considerable accuracy. Different periods in Egyptian history produced pottery with characteristic forms, from simple utilitarian vessels to elaborate decorative pieces that provide visual markers, allowing scholars to establish chronological sequences and understand the development of Egyptian civilization over vast spans of time. The evolution of pottery styles reflects changes in manufacturing technology, artistic preferences, and cultural values across different periods, making pottery studies one of the primary methods through which archaeologists reconstruct Egyptian history and trace patterns of cultural change and development. Faience, a distinctive glazed ceramic material produced throughout ancient Egypt, was manufactured extensively and used to create beads, amulets, vessels, and decorative items featuring vibrant blue and green colors derived from copper compounds that created the characteristic shine and hue. The production of faience required sophisticated knowledge of mineral chemistry and firing techniques, with Egyptian craftsmen developing glazing methods that remained unmatched in their beauty and durability for centuries. Faience objects appear in contexts ranging from common household items to precious royal treasures, suggesting that while the technique was widely used, the finest faience pieces were luxury items reserved for the wealthy and the gods, representing achievements in ancient manufacturing technology and artistic expression that commanded respect and premium value. Metalworking in ancient Egypt advanced gradually from simple copper tools and weapons during the earliest periods to increasingly sophisticated bronze implements, and eventually to iron tools and weapons during the later periods of Egyptian history. The development of bronze technology required knowledge of metallurgy and access to tin, which had to be obtained through trade with distant regions, making bronze items valuable markers of wealth and status. Gold, being more easily worked and immune to corrosion, was reserved almost exclusively for religious objects and royal insignia, with gold working techniques reaching extraordinary levels of artistry and precision that demonstrate the sophisticated understanding Egyptian craftsmen had of material properties and aesthetic principles. Stone vessels made from alabaster, limestone, and granite were crafted throughout Egyptian history with remarkable precision and artistry, serving both practical functions in daily life and ceremonial purposes in temples and tombs. These vessels demonstrate the Egyptian mastery of stoneworking technology and their aesthetic appreciation of natural materials, with some pieces showing such refined execution that they appear impossibly perfect for tools available in ancient times. The survival of these stone vessels allows modern observers to appreciate both the technical sophistication and the artistic sensibilities of Egyptian craftspeople who understood how to exploit the properties of different stones to create objects of beauty and utility that would endure for eternity. Furniture in ancient Egypt was crafted from wood inlaid with ivory and precious materials, creating pieces that combined functionality with stunning artistic beauty and wealth display. Egyptian furniture, preserved in tombs such as that of Tutankhamun, shows sophisticated joinery techniques and artistic design that suggests considerable skill and planning in construction. The styles of Egyptian furniture remained relatively consistent across centuries, with chairs, beds, and tables following established forms that provided comfort while maintaining the aesthetic and status implications associated with well-crafted furniture that demonstrated the owner's wealth and access to precious materials. Glass production in ancient Egypt gradually became more sophisticated over centuries, eventually allowing artisans to create vessels, ornaments, and beads in various colors and styles that rivaled the beauty of precious stones and made glass items valuable luxury goods. Early Egyptian glass was opaque and crude, but through experimentation and accumulated knowledge, craftsmen learned to produce transparent glass and control colors by adding various mineral compounds to create different hues. The development of glass technology represented a significant achievement in ancient manufacturing, and glass objects became highly prized items that were both beautiful and functional, with some glass vessels and ornaments from Egypt showing remarkable artistic achievement and technical mastery. Egyptian architecture evolved substantially over millennia, progressing from simple mastaba tombs to increasingly ambitious step pyramids, bent pyramids that combined different architectural approaches, and eventually to the true pyramids that became the defining monuments of pharaonic civilization. This architectural evolution reflected advancing engineering knowledge, greater command of resources, and changing religious and political philosophies about how to memorialize pharaohs and ensure their transition to the afterlife. The progression of pyramid development shows Egyptian architects and engineers solving increasingly complex problems of scale, structural integrity, and precision, demonstrating the cumulative development of technical knowledge and the ability to undertake progressively more ambitious projects with confidence in eventual success. The Nile Delta, located at the northern terminus where the Nile River spread into multiple distributaries before reaching the Mediterranean Sea, was the most fertile region of Egypt and supported dense populations of farmers and provided natural boundaries that helped defend the kingdom against invasion. The delta's exceptional fertility allowed for intensive agriculture and supported multiple cities and population centers, making it a crucial region for Egypt's economic strength and survival. The delta's location also made it a natural point of contact with Mediterranean traders and peoples, creating both opportunities for profitable trade and vulnerabilities to foreign invasion, requiring the pharaohs to maintain strong military forces to defend Egypt's northern frontier against external threats. Parte 10, Photos 91-100. Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt possessed distinct geographical characteristics that fundamentally shaped their development and identity, with Upper Egypt being narrower, more defensible, and dependent on river commerce, while Lower Egypt spread across the fertile delta. These two regions developed separately for centuries before being unified by King Narmer around 3150 BCE, yet they maintained distinct cultural identities, artistic styles, and even religious practices that reflected their different environments. The unification of these two regions into a single political entity required significant diplomatic and military effort, and even after political unification, the fundamental geographical differences between Upper and Lower Egypt continued to influence regional loyalty and cultural identity throughout pharaonic history. The fortress settlements and military outposts established by the pharaohs protected valuable trade routes, secured Egypt's borders against foreign invasions and raids, and demonstrated Egyptian power and control over contested territory surrounding the valley. These strategic military installations were positioned to monitor movement through key mountain passes, river crossings, and desert routes where merchants and armies would necessarily travel. The maintenance of these fortresses required significant ongoing investment of resources and military personnel, indicating that Egyptian pharaohs understood the importance of projecting power beyond their immediate territory and the necessity of protecting economic interests through military force and strategic positioning. The ancient Egyptians developed a sophisticated postal system using fast-traveling messengers to communicate across their vast kingdom, coordinating military operations, administrative policies, and commercial activities with remarkable efficiency. Official documents and correspondence traveled along established routes, with relay stations providing fresh horses and supplies to maintain rapid communication across Egypt's extended territory. This postal system allowed the pharaoh and his administrators to maintain centralized control over distant regions and respond quickly to emergencies or opportunities, representing a significant administrative innovation that enabled the coherent governance of an empire spanning hundreds of kilometers. The Egyptian Navy was developed and maintained to protect riverine commerce along the Nile and project power along the Mediterranean coast, defending against pirates and rival naval powers who threatened Egypt's economic and military interests. Naval vessels ranged from simple river transport boats designed to move goods and troops to warships equipped with rams and armed soldiers capable of engaging in combat against hostile fleets. The development of naval power allowed Egypt to expand its sphere of influence, establish trading posts in distant lands, and defend its coastline against invasion or piracy, making the Navy an essential component of Egyptian strategic power and economic prosperity. Mining expeditions sent by the pharaohs extracted gold, copper, and semi-precious stones from deep within the desert, providing the wealth and materials necessary for temples, royal monuments, and luxury goods that demonstrated power and connected Egypt to the divine realm. These mining operations required extensive logistics and infrastructure, with workers extracting ore from deep within the earth using primitive tools and crude methods that nonetheless proved effective over centuries of continuous operation. The precious materials extracted from these mines flowed to temples and royal workshops, where skilled artisans transformed them into objects of stunning beauty and immense religious significance, with the connection between raw materials, skilled craftsmanship, and religious expression forming a crucial cycle in Egyptian civilization. Trade expeditions sailed to distant lands including Nubia to the south, Punt to the far south and east, and the Mediterranean region, bringing back exotic goods including incense, ebony, ivory, and spices unavailable in Egypt. These trade missions serve both economic and diplomatic purposes, with Egyptian merchants establishing relationships with foreign rulers and peoples while acquiring valuable luxury goods. The materials obtained through distant trade circulated within Egypt's elite, demonstrating status and wealth, while also providing essential materials for temples and ceremonial purposes, making trade an essential component of Egypt's economy and a source of cultural contact with distant civilizations and peoples. The ancient Egyptian civilization lasted approximately 3,000 years from its unification around 3150 BCE until its conquest by Alexander the Great in 332 BCE, making it one of history's longest continuous cultures and profoundly influencing all subsequent Mediterranean and Near Eastern civilizations. Over this vast span of time, Egypt experienced periods of extraordinary power and cultural achievement, as well as periods of decline, foreign domination, and civil disorder. Yet the fundamental continuities of Egyptian culture, religion, and institutions persisted across all these changes. The longevity of Egyptian civilization demonstrates the resilience and adaptability of its institutions and the deep rootedness of its cultural traditions in the landscape and people of the Nile Valley, creating a civilization that endured changes that destroyed less stable societies and left an indelible mark on human history and cultural development. The knowledge preserved in Egyptian texts concerning mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering continues to impress scholars and scientists even in the modern world, suggesting a level of intellectual sophistication and scientific achievement that rivals that of much later civilizations. The precision of Egyptian mathematical calculations evident in pyramid construction, the accuracy of Egyptian astronomical observations, the effectiveness of many Egyptian medical treatments, and the durability of Egyptian engineering accomplishments all point to a civilization that achieved remarkable intellectual and technical heights. The study of Egyptian knowledge systems reveals a sophisticated approach to understanding the natural world and solving practical problems, with many solutions remaining effective and valid even by modern standards, demonstrating the timelessness of human intelligence and creativity. Children who were born to noble families in ancient Egypt received educational opportunities denied to common children, learning to read and write hieroglyphics, study mathematics and geometry, and master the administrative skills necessary for government service. These educated elite children often received instruction from professional scribes and priests who taught them the full scope of knowledge necessary for leadership, including religious texts, historical records, and the bureaucratic procedures governing Egypt. This educational system created a class of literate administrators who perpetuated the traditions and knowledge of Egyptian civilization from generation to generation, ensuring the continuity of sophisticated governance and the preservation of cultural memory encoded in written documents and monumental records. The remarkable preservation of Egyptian artifacts, mummified remains, and written records through the dry desert climate has provided modern scholars with an unparalleled window into one of history's greatest civilizations, allowing direct observation of clothing, tools, art, and written expressions that would normally decompose. Tombs sealed for thousands of years have yielded treasures and documents revealing how Egyptians lived, worked, created art, conducted religion, and understood their place in the cosmos. The material evidence preserved through Egypt's arid climate allows historians and archaeologists to construct detailed understandings of daily life, technological capabilities, religious beliefs, and artistic achievements that would remain obscure or unknown were it not for the exceptional preservation conditions that allowed these precious records to survive the passage of time. The spiritual and cultural legacy of ancient Egypt continues to influence human civilization even today, with Egyptian symbols, architectural styles, and mythological themes appearing in art, literature, popular culture, and esoteric traditions throughout the modern world. The majesty of the pyramids, the mystery of hieroglyphic writing, the elaborate afterlife theology, and the image of powerful pharaohs have captured human imagination for centuries and continue to fascinate people across all cultures and backgrounds. Ancient Egypt represents one of humanity's greatest achievements, demonstrating what organized societies could accomplish through cooperation, long-term planning, and the dedication of resources to great projects, leaving a legacy of monuments and knowledge that continues to speak to human aspirations toward immortality, wisdom, and grandeur.